Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Wednesday webinar with the MSc program. My name is Toby Cordeliu. I am the Director of Enrollment Management and Strategic Initiatives for the program, and am excited for all of you today to have an opportunity to hear from a terrific panel of professional consultants that we have gathered who are also MSc alumni. A bit of a departure this week, and I think that we're going to be able to do kind of a mix. These webinars, if you've made it to some in the past, have been largely content driven by some faculty members, and I think that there has been a request for some further understanding of different industries that we have MSc students spread throughout, and understanding kind of what it's like to work in those places and how to get into these specific roles. And so we're excited to be able to provide some of that for you today. I have some questions prepared for the panel, but of course, if you have anything that you are curious about, please feel free to put that in the chat at any time. We can leave some questions at the end as well, but I'd love for this to be a conversation as we move throughout, engaging with the panel and learning from their expertise. So like I said, if you have any questions as they come up or as we're discussing different things, please feel free to submit those. But I want to kind of get out of the way here and ask the panelists to please introduce yourselves a little bit. Tell us a little bit about kind of your professional background to set the stage, if you don't mind. Kathy, can we start with you?
Sure. My name is Kathy Toll, and I lead the organizational change management practice for the Parker Avery Group, which is a consulting group that focuses on retail and CPG. I started years ago. My background is in retail, but I came up through the front lines. I started on the selling floor, moved up the ranks, went into the corporate environment, training and development, backed into organizational change management that way, and then returned to graduate school at Kellogg, did a certification program there, and decided it was time to leave retail and move into consulting. So I moved from one set of crazy hours to another crazy set of hours, and I've been here 21 years.
You sound like you just realized that.
You know what? I just connected those dots. So, and graduated in 2019 from the program.
Great. Thanks a lot. Greg?
Hey, everybody. My name is Greg Voller, and I'm MSc 93, way back, way back. So I was mentioning to Toby and Brian as we were getting ready for this. This was part of when this was a 2-year program. I was the first year when we went from a cohort of 16 students, we doubled in size to 32. That was the first group I was with back in the 90s. So really since then, it's been really a springboard for me. So over the course of my career, I've worked both inside organizations and as well as a consultant, primarily in the areas of organizational communication, and like Kathy, very much heavily focused on change as well too. So currently I'm a senior director for a consulting firm based in Chicago called Gagan McDonald. We're about 50 people in our organization, and we really focus on helping transform companies who transform the world. In fact, what we often say when we get into work with a client is we're trying to help one dysfunctional company at a time. And we say that to their face, and it's really true if you think about it, because every organization is dysfunctional in some way, shape, or form. The other piece that I'll share is that I've led internal communications functions on a global basis for companies that include Johnson Controls and Harley Davidson. So there was a point where I had a lot more facial hair. I've got a lot of black shirts up in my closet, and I used to have a motorcycle as well too. Lastly, I'm also very proud. I currently serve as president of the Association of Change Management Professionals. And that's a fast-growing global group of just that, change professionals with more than 40 chapters around the world. And so I'm just so pleased and privileged that my peers have asked me to serve in a volunteer role as president of that association at this point as well. So nice to meet all of you.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Brian?
Thanks, Toby. And first I have to say, Kathy, I was really impressed with your on-the-fly math skills. That's a very rare commodity in a marketing program. And, Greg, to your point, consultants, I always like to say that we put the fun in dysfunctional. So it's certainly a skill that we bring to the table. But thank you, Toby, for the invite. I am class of 2012, but also spent time in 2011. So Toby and I, we were classmates back in the MSc program. I hold 3 communications degrees, an associate's from Harper's, a bachelor's from North Park University, which I'm very proud to say that I graduated summa cum laude and top of my class. And I'm proud of that for reasons that we'll discuss later on. And then I also hold the MSc degree here from Northwestern. But a little bit about myself before I get into my professional background. I'm a father of 4. I have 6-year-old twin daughters, 5-year-old son, and I have a 3-week-old son that we brought home from the hospital not too long ago. The other bit about me I'll share is I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I'm big into fantasy, comic books, and pretty much anything historical fiction as well. So with that about me, a little bit about my career in my role. So I recently transitioned into a new firm called Slalom. Some of you may have heard of that. It's headquartered out in Seattle, but we have a large presence in the Chicago market. I'm a director at Slalom and a leader in our healthcare and our life sciences practice. Prior to coming to Slalom, I spent 6 years at a boutique firm called a REIT, and that's really where I developed my industry niche, if you will. I spent a lot of time in healthcare. I worked what we'll call the mid to back office within health plan operations. And, it's really there that I don't want to say I cut my teeth in consulting, but in consulting, you typically develop some sort of expertise or perspective, and that's where I was able to start to provide more value to my clients. I've been able to work in probably 15 to 16 states across the U.S., everywhere from California to Oregon, all the way in the East Coast to New York and Florida. So I've been back in the world where we used to fly and travel. I've been pretty much to many of the states across the U.S. So that's kind of my more recent experience, which I'm happy to unpack. But prior to that, I spent 4 years doing some strategic sourcing and procurement consulting, and then 3 years at the Chicago Tribune, which is really my first foray into internal consulting, where I was providing business intelligence to different business units within the Trib. So that's just a little bit about my background. I'm very excited to be here and excited to be with Greg and Kathy to talk with everyone here.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And congratulations on the new addition to your family, Brian. 3 weeks
Thank you.
Old. That's a lot of work. I don't know if we're taking you away from responsibilities right now. Is this an hour?
Oh, no.
This respite?
Please, if you want to go an extra hour, I'm happy to go.
Great. Got it. So I'll throw this to the group here. I think that there is a lot of interest, and I this is from my experience kind of interviewing and reading applications to people coming to the MSc program. People are working in a particular industry and everybody says, I'm interested in consulting and I want to do consulting. And talking to them in their interviews, it's a really wide range of understanding in terms of what that is. Can you help us unpack that a little bit? And I don't know even if it's the same for the 3 of you. What's a week in the life? And maybe we'll frame this in pre or what we hope to be post-pandemic conversations right now. But what's a week in the life in your job right now, in your consulting role? Anybody?
Business consulting, when you tell that to people, they look at you like, oh, what do you do? So for consulting, it's a really blurry term. When I think of what I do in my particular role, I'll piggyback on the dysfunction is particularly we're brought into organizations when they're implementing large systems. I am not an IT person. I've never played one on TV, but I am always looking for how will this impact the people? What will change in their roles? When do they need to know about it? So it is, I will tell you, more documentation than I would prefer. Whether it's PowerPoint, pick your poison, spend a lot of time there. But for me, really, the benefit is when you do it right, you are really becoming part of the organization and helping them navigate through a really disruptive time. So sometimes that's counseling, sometimes that's presentations, sometimes that might be, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? And a lot of times, which I draw on my MSc, is it's a lot of help with teams learning how to make decisions efficiently and effectively that don't take 3 years.
Don't take 3 years. There's an asterisk there. I appreciate that. Does this resonate for you, Greg and Brian?
Sure, and yeah, spot on. I'll just build on Kathy's great introduction to that. What I will say is that a week in consulting is always unique. There's never a week that's the same. And I'll get a little bit in a minute in terms of what sort of that means from a sort of a specific activity perspective. But what I will also say though too is that because I've worked about half of my career as a consultant and the other half within organizations, I know where my energy comes from, and I know how, and know what's important to me. And this is what energizes me, and it gives me, I think, just a better purpose and flexibility in my life. So I would just start there. I really build on what Kathy said is that, to the extent that we've earned it, our clients look to us as experts. They look to us as guides. They look to us as coaches. And so I think, a lot of what I've have come to learn over the years, and frankly, even more heightened here over the last year, is how you are a listening ear, how you are a source of empathy when somebody's not even asking you for empathy, but they're wanting it. They're not going to directly ask you for it. Let me restate that. And so a lot of it then is exactly as Kathy was framing it. It's understanding their needs and opportunities, and giving and not just giving them a prepackaged solution, but tying together a solution that really does fit where they're at and really connecting them towards that. So that gives me energy as a problem solver, because I'll just say that when I've been in organizations, I get bored like after about 18 months inside an organization, and I see a lot of head nods to that as well too. So, but I think that's different for everybody. Everybody's sort of unique. You have your own sort of personal equation to sort of think about there as well too.
Yeah, that's really well said, Greg. And I would add to that to say that, Toby, you mentioned that there's ambiguity around what does it mean to be a consultant. That's because ambiguity exists, and part of a role of your consultant is trying to make sense of chaos, helping to provide some structure and perspective to provide options that can help your client or whoever solve an issue. Has anyone ever here provided advice to somebody to help solve a solution? Well, if you have, I hate to say it, you've consulted somebody before. And I think just inherently what consulting really is leveraging skills or knowledge, expertise, services or a product, and to help solve a problem. And I have these number one rules of consulting. My number one rule of consulting is don't come with issues, come with context, perspective, and options, because essentially what our job is to help someone else solve their problem. You may not solve it yourself, but you're helping them through thought leadership. You're helping them think through a problem where they may not have the perspective, they may not have the skills, or they may not have the expertise to solve it on their own. And you bring that to the table to help them solve their issues in a way that Kathy said that may be more efficient or more effective.
So how does one gain I've got an alarm going, or a siren going off in the background here, which is inevitable. How does one gain the skills to do what you do? It sounds like you all, maybe I'm wrong if I wasn't listening correctly, transitioned into consulting from industry. What can you tell us a little bit more about the specifics of that transition? Kathy, I know you mentioned backing into change management from training and development. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, and just in general, for me, consulting, at the point I was in time when I made the transition, my next promotion in my career would have been a relocation based on my employer. It would have been New York, it would have been San Francisco, and I didn't have that ability at that point in my life. I had 2 young stepchildren and a husband and couldn't actually say, see ya. So consulting was a nice pivot, because I am very much like Greg. I don't even need to master something. I need to understand it. And then I'm like, please let me move on. And often in industry, that's not viewed well, is when you are put in supply chain or you are put in training and development, you will stay there the rest of your entire life, whether you want to or not. So I always was kind of moving into operations, training and development, organizational change management, sales management, to get a really nice, well-rounded perspective of how an operation worked. When I went into consulting, my focus was more on store operations. So helping the efficiency within walking into a store and helping them optimize, so to speak, their processes. I moved into change management because you can have process and you can have system, and it can be all I's dotted, T's crossed. But you know, those people, they just throw wrenches in things when you didn't think they would. And that's when I learned, I'm like, you got to figure out these people, because the whole process and the system stuff will be derailed in 5 minutes by one person quietly rolling their eyes in the room.
I'm thinking of those people right now. Thank you. And I'm sure everybody else is thinking of the people that roll their eyes, or maybe you're one of them, which is also perfectly fine.
And I will, to address your question, I was able to shift into consulting going back to graduate school, because I was so centric in retail. A consulting firm would look at my background and say, no. But when I found the right consulting firm that specialized in how to retail and wholesale practice and the skill set I was bringing, then it was transferable. Yeah. But I did need the credential. I will say that.
Sure. That's good advice, to recognize that there are, not all firms are equal, right? And everybody has, yes. And I'm sure many will feel like they can do it all, but that's not necessarily the case. And having your specific verticals that your expertise, where your expertise lies, is worth understanding as a potential employer.
Yeah.
Greg, tell us more about you. Was your transition deliberate? Were you working for a couple of years to try to become a consultant? Were you invited? How did it work?
I would generally say that I'd like to say my curiosity just kind of advanced me to that.
Okay.
And, I was actually, I think back at the time, I was one of the youngest participants ever in this program. I was in my early 20s, and most of my peers then were in their 30s and 40s. And so I just gained so much tremendous experience by connecting with that fellow group of cohorts. And I would just sort of combine those two together, is that, I have a background in journalism, and as I said, I've led internal communications programs, but I really was always curious about the impact that communications was having in an organization. And I just didn't want to be a producer of X, Y, and Z. And because that was, again, just not satisfying to me. So I would just say that curiosity just kept sort of, layering over, and talk about what's the performance impact and what's the human behavioral impact around communications. And so I think it's more curiosity than that got me going into it. And sort of the inflection point was when I was with Harley Davidson, and we brought in a speaker from Chicago. Her name is Janine LaMarche. And Janine has her change approach called Managed Change. And it punctuated for me everything I was trying to accomplish in the prior 10 years. And it gave it voice, it gave it structure, it gave it process, if you will, into all of that. And so to me, that then just sort of put my curiosity on steroids and just got me going more and more from a problem solving perspective. And a little what Brian said earlier, to think about, the context, perspective, and options pieces of that. So I think it's just sort of built on that base of curiosity, and then finding all these experiences to blend into then drive it. And so, and now that being said, I've gone back and forth between inside an organization and a consultant. I've gone back and forth, I guess, 3 times, if who's ever following that. So the reason I keep coming back is because, again, it's what I said earlier, it's my energy source. The only reason why I've left is because I got to work for an outstanding world-class brand like Harley Davidson. Who could turn that down?
Yeah. I like it. Brian, you were at the Tribune, right? Before that was your last industry role before moving into consulting. Was that a search for you? How did it work?
Yeah. So what Kathy and Greg said are 100% spot on. And for me, I knew I wanted to get into consulting for the exact same reasons that Kathy did. I wanted to be able to continue to not just deepen my understanding in areas, but broaden it as well. And I love the idea that I can help solve a specific problem and then take on a new project and then continue to grow, sort of that choose your own adventure route. And what I will say is the MSc degree is a fantastic tool to help you accomplish your goals. Everything that you're doing now is a tool that can help you either get to where you want to be, or how you use it is up to you. How I broke into consulting is, one, I knew I wanted to do it, but I had to brand myself. Having gone from the Tribune, I knew that there's basically two routes. I could go into more of like a general route, like, yeah, you just a general analyst or consultant route, or I could find something that was a little bit more specialized with my background in marketing and communications. I decided that I did not want to go to Big Four because that would niche me pretty quickly. And I wanted the opportunity to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and to define my own path. And so I found a couple of boutique firms that really fit my needs. And leveraging my MSc degree as well as my other communications degree was a big sell and a value add to them, because they were looking for people who could communicate effectively, who can communicate how are we solving problems and support change management. And that's a huge part of what the MSc program helps you do, is to be able to communicate, to cut through noise, and to be able to effectively deliver a message to an audience that they will then take that information and then run with it, right? At the end of the day, it wasn't just the communications, but I'm a big proponent of, if you have a hard skill, you need to try to augment that with some sort of intangible softer skills, if you will. If you have a communications degree, I also supplemented that with learning about statistics and analysis. So as much as I am a communication person, I would say I'm just as much, if not more so, an analytics person, which is a huge boon to consultancies these days. So one thing that I would suggest to this group is your MSc degree is going to be a huge value to you, but also supplement that with some other type of skills, whether it's coding, whether it's your ability to do statistical analysis. Something else that provides value will help you break in if you're looking for more of like an entry level, getting in at the ground level for consulting. But getting into different levels, that's another topic I would say as well.
We're leading into the next question, the next topic, but I do want to take half a step back, because you mentioned Big Four, and we better just describe this quickly. Brian, if you don't mind, kind of helping everybody understand what you mean when you say Big Four, and maybe relative to, I don't know how to categorize. Is it just non-Big Four? Is that everybody else, or what does that mean?
Oh, the old mute button. Yeah. So in consulting, there's this general term that we say Big Four, which is really Deloitte, KPMG, oh gosh, PwC, and EY,
Bain.
Ernst & Young.
Yeah,
Bain, I think
EY.
EY. That's what we consider Big Four. It also kind of transfers to some of the larger, anecdotally, it just means larger consulting firms. You would throw an Accenture in there, et cetera.
Bain and McKinsey, right?
Exactly right.
Exactly.
Kinsey, exactly right. That's what you would call Big Four.
Bureaucratic. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a personal point of view. I will share that once upon a time there were the Big Five. And actually one of the buildings at Northwestern is named after Arthur Andersen. I was in their business consulting practice. So my first foray into business consulting started with Andersen Consulting. And great training ground, but choosing the size of firm and its culture makes or breaks your experience.
100%, Kathy.
Yeah.
That could not be more pertinent for anybody who's interested in getting into consulting. And to that point, Toby, that I decided not to go Big Four specifically because I did not want to have to deal with that bureaucracy. I knew that an organization that large would, you either get niched or pigeonholed pretty quickly, and you lose the agency to be able to choose your own path very quickly, unless you latch on to somebody who can advocate for you.
Yes.
But the two firms that I was at prior to Slalom were Arthur Andersen offshoot firms, both Coleman Group. They were about 40 individuals, and then a REIT, which by the time I had left, they were closer to 400, 450.
So I'm just curious, do we have anybody on the call here from any of the Big Four or Five at this point?
Now that I've offended you.
If not, the reason, Toby, do we?
It doesn't look like it.
Okay. Well, so maybe I'll be bold with you, Kathy, then a little bit as well too. I would say over the last 4 years, because of my MSc background, because of my career experience, I've been engaged with on engagements, and Brian and Kathy, you possibly as well too, where we've kind of had to frankly come in and pick up some of the pieces from some of those big 4, big 5 consulting firms. And what I find is the common thread there is that they have a very program orientation to their solutions and what they're bringing. They don't necessarily have a human and empathetic component to their solutions as well too. And so I would just, I think that's really special. I think that's really special that I think MSC has a great foundation in, and really kind of understanding, again, individuals and humans. And that's something to leverage, I think. So that's something that, I would encourage if any of you are thinking about this, to build on that, to say, what can I do to help deliver on that sort of that human connection? Because the larger organizations, they're not delivering it. I'll just be very blunt.
Yeah, and consulting has changed. Over the past decade or so, it has really changed. And Greg, you nailed it spot on. A lot of what I would say the boutique or smaller firms do these days is they have to pick up the pieces from some of the larger consultancies. With that said, I will say that Big Four has changed as well in their approach to try to incorporate more of that human element, a lot more focus on implementation as opposed to productizing their solutions, which is what typically Big Four had done. Here's a playbook. Here's what you need to do, go execute it. And what organizations we're finding is that they themselves did not have the ability to implement and to realize those opportunities themselves. And so that's where they would typically bring in a smaller firm like the ones that I was at to help them actually implement those opportunities. With that being said, big data has also leveled the playing field. These smaller firms can move, they're more nimble, they can identify the same opportunities just as well as Big Four. I think the experience and sort of the industry expertise, they will always have sort of a hold on that per se, but the landscape of consulting has really changed, and it's a really exciting time to try to break into and get involved with it.
So I think all three of you have said the words break into in the context of transitioning into a consulting role. I'm curious, and we've talked around this a couple different ways, but when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I want to get into consulting, what's your first response? What's the very first thing? Do you have a question that you ask right away? Is it a warning? What do you do? What do you do first when somebody says to you on a one-to-one conversation, hey, I want to get into consulting. I know this is what you do.
I will ask, define consulting to me. And then listen to how they have it framed and go from there.
At the risk of
go ahead.
No,
sorry.
please.
No, because it's like change management. You're like, oh, I'm a change management practitioner. And people are like, great. What does that mean? So I like to dig into tell me how you think about it. Tell me what you think it is, and then we can compare notes.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. And I think that I've seen a lot of people who have worked with organizations, maybe just because they need, they're looking for a next career opportunity. They kind of think that it's just to pick up what I've been doing, and then I can do this in a different sort of framework and a format. My question, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding repetitive, my question is how do you see yourself, and what are you looking to accomplish? And how do you see yourself as a professional, and what energizes you around that? And because I think it goes back to how individuals see sort of causal relationships of needs and opportunities to, again, perspectives and options, to use Brian's terms from earlier. So then I think that opens up a discussion typically with an individual.
Greg, I love that you're using that. That's like my whole goal in life, is to perpetuate just that one saying, so it'll be on a bumper sticker somewhere.
There you go.
Toby, I would say 3 things. If one is, how do you deal with uncertainty would be the first question. And just like Kathy says, I would love to listen to how a good consultant listens for understanding and not to reply. That would be the first thing that I would say. The second is, and maybe 2 and 3 are more traditional because consulting has changed, but the second is, do you mind putting in the work? Tell me about your work ethic. And then third would be, Well, it used to be, do you like to travel, or do you that? But that is definitely not a thing that we worry about anymore. But honestly, the first is the uncertainty, because a consultant, you never know. You may not know what your day looks like. You may not know what your week looks like. And it's up to you to help understand what is the goal and the result we're trying to drive through. And you can provide the context, perspective, and options to help your team be able to drive to that goal. So sometimes you're telling your boss, hey, here's what I want. Here's what I would thinking of doing. I'm thinking of doing A, B, or C because we're trying to do this thing. And that's based on this goal that we're trying to get at. And you may tell your boss, this is how we're going to do it today. And that's kind of the whole living with uncertainty and providing structure and context, perspective, and options approach with consulting.
What's the right answer to the work ethic question?
A lot. You
Right.
have to have a very strong work ethic. It's not a 9 to 5. You have clients that might say, hey, they moved the board meeting. We need the presentation tomorrow. And they call at 8 o'clock the evening before. So it's not a clock in, clock out. Although, again, to reiterate what Greg and Brian have said, if the work is engaging and it's intellectually stimulating, you're going to get some stuff where you're just like, oh my God, like formatting PowerPoint. It's part of the role. But then you get to work on really cool stuff that you're like, oh my gosh, it's 10 o'clock at night. I didn't even realize the time.
Yeah.
So it's definitely bleeds into other areas of your life. And I will totally echo Brian's comment about ambiguity. If you cannot, and oftentimes you will be asked or tasked to do things, you're like, I don't know how to do that. What made you think I had that expertise?
Yeah. And
you got to figure it out. So you sit in gray a lot, and that's not always comfortable, and you got to get okay with that.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're out in the beginning that, the 10 o'clock, and I didn't even know I was working is echoing Greg's message about where do you get your energy from, right? If you do what you love, then you never work a day in your life, right? So if you're doing work that you really enjoy, then the work ethic issue is kind of taken care of because you're having a good time. Does that sound?
Yes, and you have to just accept that it's like, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to do some screenshots and format this 300-page PowerPoint. Okay. Sometimes that happens too.
Sure.
If I could, I guess as we describe that, as I sort of wonder about what all of you do in your professional lives, my guess is that it's not that far off in a lot of ways of what you're already doing. So I'm wondering also too, maybe is also too, as part of the lore of being a consultant, is how you market and brand the solutions that you're able to provide and be comfortable with that. As I said earlier, we because we're not part of the organization, we're a third party. That's both a vice and a virtue. The virtue of it is that, oh, you must have a lot of experience from other places, other organizations, other situations. What do you think? It's a vice also too, because I keep getting the question, something that goes along the lines of, we have a major organizational change coming up. We want to announce it. How many days will it take for people to accept this? I have no earthly idea, because everybody's a different individual, a different human. But what I can share with you is some solutions about how to really think about the environment you're creating that will drive readiness and adoption for that as well too. So again, I think a lot of you do a lot of what we're describing here, but I think maybe a difference here is how you then promote, market, influence others with those types of solutions, and how you can be flexible in that approach as well too.
I think that we're going down a path so here's my first I didn't send this topic to any of you, but what does the ideal client relationship look like? I'm sure that you do some coaching to your clients, like say, this is how we're going to work. And this is what are those instructions? What are you hoping for? Greg, I don't know if you want to keep going, maybe.
Sure, I can go. Yep, am I still on? Yep. Sure, I think just working. The ideal relationship is something like this. Is a client who understands that they have some challenges and some opportunities. They're open to solutions. they're going to put some guardrails around you, and they're going to be very clear with what those guardrails are at the upfront, and that they're looking to grow their capability in this space, and they're open to that coaching. So I've used the word open now, I think at least twice, maybe 3 times. So this whole notion of openness, if I put the inverse on this, the worst clients are somebody who already has a prepackaged solution and are asking you to come in and just validate it. Because no matter what you provide as a solution, they've already had it in their mind. And if the data you assemble doesn't obviously get them to that, well, what worth are you to that? So I kind of think of those terms around openness and closed. And I think that those are starting points for best client relationships.
Brian, we have you back. What's the ideal client relationship work? How does that work for you?
Yeah, can you all hear me? Am I doing okay? Perfect. So a lot of what Greg just said is spot on. I would say that one of the most important things is feedback and engagement. Having a client that is willing to provide feedback and input is so critically important for your success as a consultant. The other thing is just engagement, understanding that we are viewed more as a partner as opposed to a vendor or somebody who's just doing a thing. I like to view it as we are strategic partners, and together we are going to build this together, or we're going to solve this together. And the more that you have a client that is in that sort of bucket, that they are that sort of personality, you're going to do well. With that being said, you don't get to pick your clients in consulting.
Exactly.
You don't get that choice. So as a consultant, you have to learn to be able to work well and to be effective with any type of client. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned from the MSC program is that communication styles are so different. I'll just give you an example. A lot of my clients, the executive leaderships are Gen X Caucasian males. And there's a very specific way that they like to be communicated to in order for you to be effective in your role. Understanding that and a lot of the principles that we had discussed in the MSC program helped me be able to make connections with that demographic, which would not necessarily be easy for me had I not had these things in consideration. So, again, the whole idea of the message is cutting through the noise, and it doesn't matter what my intent is or what I'm trying to say. It's how does that audience receive it? And what did they take? Exactly right. How did they perceive it? And understanding that is so critically important when it pertains to your client.
I see a lot of head nodding, Kathy.
Yes, it's funny because I may be a little, have a different perspective is oftentimes, particularly in an organizational change role, I'll walk in, oftentimes my colleagues are there for a systems implementation. We're working with the IT team. We've got our business people, and I am pizza girl. They're like, we don't need OCM. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then as it's a very subtle sort of, I love the idea of helping people understand and getting them to the point. Once I have a client, and I know this is, and Toby knows me well enough, and I apologize. If a client swears in front of me, I know we've gotten to that relationship where I'm like, do you mind if I give you some feedback? Because I'm not sure the comment or what you presented landed on the folks the way that you intended. No. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's also too that they might provide feedback back to you. But I love a client to collaborate with. I don't want to shove stuff in front of them. It's like, I have a point of view, but let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. I want to hear what your point of view is, because I didn't think about it in terms of how that, I didn't think about it in that perspective. Plus, I just finished Adam Grant's book, Think Again. So I'm all about like reevaluating what, what my beliefs are. And it's like, you can't take things at surface value and think, you know what, I don't know, maybe I need to think about that solution and yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, so you just mentioned Adam Grant's book. We've got a couple other book suggestions in the chat. Also, anybody that has any questions, please feel free to submit those into the chat at any time. Greg mentioned his presidency as the Association of Change Management Professionals. How else do you keep up to date on and to make sure that you're delivering current solutions to your
Yeah.
clients? How do you keep abreast of what's new and what's happening in the worlds that you work in?
I'm going to build on Craig's word, curiousness. If you do not have, I love to learn. And if you're not curious and if you're not digging into things, you really have to do a lot of work. What I miss the most is the Northwestern Library resource where I could just go in and slog around for research and data and, just get some new ways of looking at things. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of, I was certified in ProSci, which is a change management certification. I'm a member of the change management professionals, but a lot of it too is getting outside of your cohort and really understanding. I'm in retail. That has changed so freaking dramatically over the last 30 years. What I used to do and what I do now is so very, very different. And how our clients are interacting and needing to go to market is very different. So you constantly have to be open to learning, throwing an idea away, old news, learning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's spot on. And I'm struck by the fact that Kathy, Brian, and myself, we have all sort of gravitated towards, we all have change in our consulting framework and title, right? But really, what does that mean, right? And it's just that it's helping organizations, strengthen or get better around all of that. And I just think that there's so much more happening now in the world to help create those solutions, to create those improvements with that. I'm so excited that, here at Northwestern too, we've, over the last several years, the whole MS LOC program has taken off, if you're familiar with that, around leadership and organizational change. And that's happening in a lot of places that we see this as well too. So I would just specifically add then to Kathy's really excellent list is connecting with others around the globe. And that is one of the values that Kathy gets as a member of that association, because we're connected to people and we're understanding what is happening in their parts of the world that we're not even thinking of. We're not even thinking of in terms of how organizations are moving forward, how they're changing. I'll just give you a quick fact. One of the largest growing regions for individuals that are looking to be change professionals is in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, because they still have so much growth around infrastructure and systems and processes and new ways of working. It's a hotspot literally for consultants and individuals that can help drive that. And so those things are emerging around the world, but I think that curiosity and finding those resources and everything, if you start really thinking about change, I don't mean to sound too sort of esoteric here, but there's so many things in everyday experiences that have a change influence that I see that I never saw 10, 15 years ago. And I think about, well, what is the behavior that's going to happen as a result of that? And just to be an observer, I think is so critical as well too.
Greg, you hit on something that I think is critically important in the attributes of a successful consultant. And because I love numbering things, I always say there's 3 things that I look for in a teammate. The first is curiosity. How inquisitive are they? How much do they want to learn about the world around them or the environment around them? To match that up, curiosity with resourcefulness. If you're curious and you're resourceful, you are going to move mountains. There's the most successful consultants that I've worked with aren't the ones that come with like all of this expertise in a specific industry, or they aren't the ones that are the most skilled with analytics. They're the ones that are the most curious and the ones that are the most resourceful. And then the last is sass and sarcasm. Just bring fun. I think that's also a key, because that's the human component. You need to be able to make those interpersonal connections. You need to be able to break through with people. And those are sort of the 3 characteristics that I highly value when I look for consultants that are joining my teams.
Yeah. Once you can find somebody comfortable swearing around you, then you've made it.
There you go.
Right.
We have straight, Toby.
Right. We have a raised hand. Nazish, it's great to see you.
Yes, it's lovely to see you, Toby. And Brian and I were in the same batch.
Nazish, it's so great to see you.
Yes. So my question was, when Greg mentioned that Saudi Arabia has a lot of change management consultants coming in, I'm wondering, then it is people who live there, right? Because we're not going to know what works best for something far, far away, especially given the cultural dynamics, especially given, the way Brian said, appealing to a certain mindset.
Mhm.
Naz, I'd say yes and no to that. For sure, many individuals who are local to that region are growing their experience and their expertise capabilities in that as well too. However, I would also say that my firm that I'm a part of right now, at least pre-COVID, we are very much a partner in some very enterprising transformational changes taking place in that part of the world. And what we were bringing to that experience that other organizations didn't have was a way of just really understanding and thinking about behavior. And now, granted, our firm has a sort of a model view in terms of how we look at that, and that was a value in that. So I've seen multiple engagements where how different organizations with different specialties come together to form a really awesome and powerful solution with that as well too. So I'd like to think that as we evolve into a post-pandemic world, that those will reemerge even more so. In fact, that almost makes it sound like they stopped. They haven't stopped. It's just a matter of they've been reconfigured in some ways in how that happens. So I'm open to. I have a more optimistic viewpoint that I think that there's partnerships that can happen based on what specific expertise you can bring to the equation.
Thank you. That's very, very heartening to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Again, anybody else with a question, please feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. I want to keep going with kind of what's next for you professionally. What do consultants aspire to? So you talked about the Big Four earlier, and my understanding of those organizations is that it's a very clear-cut path to you're either on a partner track or you're not, and you're 2 years doing this, 3 years doing this, and what you're going to be doing is very, very clearly set out ahead of you. If that's attractive, great, go do that. What about the rest of you? What's next for you professionally? What do you hope to still accomplish?
That's a great question. I am not above. I have been striving at my firm on the road to partner. And at other firms, I don't know if it would have been as important, but at this firm, because the leadership is so great and I enjoy the people I work with. But I don't think I'd ever move to another position. I don't know if I'd ever go to another consulting firm. What I might do is go back out on my own, which I was for several years before I joined a firm. But consulting's one of those, and now I want to do this. Unless you're on that partner track and that's really where you're going, you have to have different motivators besides just like a title.
Yeah, Kathy, I'm going to echo a lot of exactly what you said, and here's the and plus to that whole thing. Any job that you have needs to be providing you as much value and growth as you are providing that job. And the way that I always view it with consulting can typically have, there's like three types. You have the people who come in, they want, because I love numbers, they come with the experience and they get out industry, jump into a different position. You've got the people who tend to age out once they have a family because the work hours just tend to be too much, or you have the lifers. What I would say is one of the changes in consulting more recently over the past 5 or 6 years, but probably even more so over the last 3 or 4, is sort of this choose your own adventure path. Typically speaking, it goes from like analyst to consultant, then you're managing, then you're in a director, and then you're in sales. And at the end of the day, it's so funny. Like a lot of us break into our workforces by starting in sales, and then that's where you end up with consulting, is driving revenue, because revenue makes the world go round. But understanding that there might be different avenues to get to revenue generation is important. There can be delivery paths that can get you there. It can be expanding your expertise in a specific market or a specific solution or a practice or an area of expertise that you can develop. All that being said, I go back to the first statement with the firm that you're with or the organization that you're with should be providing you with as much value in accomplishing your own professional and personal goals as you are providing that organization in terms of hitting their goals. I'm a big, big fan of where you are is where you want to be. I say that because many people who break into consulting, millennials and Gen Z, they're thinking already, I need to hit this, I need to get this promotion. I need to be senior consultant by next year so that I can be manager by 2025, so that I can be a partner by 2030, whatever it might be. The fact is, if you're thinking that far down the line, you're missing out on so many incredible opportunities to learn and to grow with exactly where you're at right now. So again, I go back to this, where you're at is where you want to be. That's not to say don't do that at the sacrifice of, of planning for the future, but there is so much that you can learn and to grow and to develop with the situation that you're currently in, that if you're not absorbing all of that, that's not helping you to grow and to build your brand so that you can position yourself to be in a place where you want to be in the future.
Hey, Toby, I know that it's like Tom and Marcia have questions. Let me just add in 30 seconds here. I'm going to take a different route to this question because personally, I'm less concerned about stature, position, title. And here's what's valuable to me next in my career. From my experiences, to have a validated, appreciated, and utilized, if you want to call it a model or way of thinking that influences others. That's what's really meaningful to me now, to give back to the profession and to help others, with that too. So I think that's, I'll just say that's something that I'd like to share in terms of how also where you can go with this perspective as well.
No, thank you all for those insights. I appreciate it.
Interesting enough, if I might add one thing, not one of us had mentioned anything about money, which I think is critical to being a successful long-term consultant. Yes, the money can be good, but if that's what's solely driving you, I think that you're going to not have a fulfilling career in consulting if that's your main motivator.
Wonderful. Tom, I see your hand up, please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm a class of 2004. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Class of 2004. One of the recommendations I would have is that I've been in nonprofits for years. And as you mentioned, Greg, that's an industry that's been growing a lot, and we bring in a lot of consultants, but sometimes people don't think of nonprofits as working with consultants. And so, for example, I've brought in consultants, and like you said, I look at them as partners, but one we brought in that did surveys for us, that it was a $20,000 deal. So I would suggest looking at nonprofits if you want to get into consulting as well. There's a lot of money there. We can't sometimes afford to bring in salaried people, but bring in an expert that can do the work for us, get it done, cut through the chaos. That's what we do. So I would recommend to everyone, if you're looking to get in consulting, check out some of the nonprofit world. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute.
There you go.
I'm not camera ready, but I do have on my my Northwestern sweatshirt.
Okay.
That was not planned. Anyway, I want to thank Brian for stating that, it kind of sounds like when you're because I want to go into business for myself, being a consultant. And it sounds to me that kind of going in and kind of being yourself and having that sass and whatever else you have to bring to the table to kind of break the ice and, kind of draw people in. It was really, really good advice. And I really appreciate that, because someone that I'm working with to kind of get me into the area that I'm trying to go into is kind of stringent. And it's kind of like, that's not my style. And Toby knows me. I'm in class of 2017, and, I'm not a stringent person, and what I want to do and what, in order for me to be successful in what I'm trying to do, it would require for me to be my authentic self and not to be something somebody else wants me to be. And in the past, being my authentic self, I have been very successful with drawing people in based off of, my personality and the way I teach and the way I present myself, and not necessarily being, okay, you have to be this, 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 and this. And that's just, to me, that's not who I am. So Brian, thank you so much for kind of easing that. And I think Catherine kind of touched on that a little bit too with if you get someone to swear in front of you, you should be straight. But thank you so much. I do have to get back to work, so I am going to drop off. But thank you all so much for everything. I really do appreciate your input and your suggestions and everything. Thank you. Thanks,
Marcia,
Toby.
I'd love to just add to that very quickly that the
Sure.
firm that I'm at in Slalom, that is one of the core guiding principles of our firm is be your authentic self. And they've created an environment that allows you to be your authentic self.
Yeah.
What I will say is that is not fully common across the industry with consulting
No.
today. It's changing. The culture of consultancies are changing, but we are at our best when we are ourselves, and finding a firm that fits you is so key if you want to be successful. So thank you, Marcia. That's incredible. That's incredible feedback and perspective.
Oh, no. And just to piggyback on that, what we've learned in our courses at, through the MSC program is to know your audience. And so based off of that, you kind of, know exactly how to present yourself and what you can and cannot say and get away with.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
You're in good hands.
I like the
Thank
piggybacking
you.
on the piggybacking. Mike Roloff would be proud of the jargon. Hyacinth, I think we'll give you the last question.
Oh, awesome. Hello, I'm Hyacinth Boone, class of 1996, so just a little bit after Greg. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area working at biotech in global human resources. I want to ask Brian, I thought that was really insightful, Brian. You said having your soft skills, but also having a hard skill to go along with that. And I think that's really wise. I'm also interested in the analytics area. How did you go about doing that?
You know what? That's a great question. Today's day and age, there are so many wonderful tools that exist. LinkedIn offers courses. There's online courses that you can easily get access to that can help teach you SQL coding or statistical analysis, regression models, things of that nature. What I do think there is some value if you don't have a degree in it is some sort of certification that you can show on your LinkedIn profile or put on your resume that says that I have been certified, I've completed these courses. It's something that helps reduce risk and mitigates risk in the eyes of a potential employer when they see, yeah, this person has all of the communication degrees in the world, but you know what? We wonder, can they do analysis? But they've completed these boot camps. And yes, that's very helpful. Does that answer your question? I think you're on.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Wonderful. I think that this is a great place to end, everyone. Greg's mentioning Mike Roloff. Mike, our current students that are on here, everybody's taking in the custom program is enjoying Mike's class right now. So it's a special time and a coming of age course in the MSC experience to be sure. So I'm glad we're all on the same page there. But I just want to offer my sincere gratitude to the panel for joining us today. All of the comments, I'm getting some private comments coming through as well, talking about how terrific it's been to listen to all of your perspectives and an insightful take on the industry. So I'm going to put a check mark next to this webinar as a major success. So thanks to the three of you for joining. I'm very, very appreciative. For everybody else, the next week, for any prospective students that are watching here, I am presenting next week's webinar on essay writing. So, and it's completely self-serving since I read all of your essays, for me to give some advice on what it is that I want you to write about. And then 2 weeks after that, we have a TBD date on March 3rd. So have a couple faculty potentially in the works. But then on March 14th, is the next faculty presentation where Nashir Contractor is going to be talking to us about networking through a crisis and understanding how even in what seem to be dire times, there are opportunities to increase, improve, leverage your networks. And so that's just under a month away. And we'll have invites coming out to those shortly. But again, huge thanks to everybody for attending today. Huge thanks to the panel for joining. It was great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks.